we will continue with Perek Dalit. Vayehi kasher tamu kol hagoy la'avor es hayarden. When everybody had finished crossing the Yarden, again the 10th of Nisan, Vayomer Hashem el Yehoshua lemor. Hashem says to Yehoshua, now we're going to understand the 12 people that were referred to earlier. K'chu lachem min ha'am shnei masar anashim. Choose from the people 12 individuals. Ish echad mishavet. Now it's interesting. We always talk about there being 12 tribes. Now the truth of the matter is, if you count Shevet Levi and you count Ephraim and Manasseh as 2 tribes, you actually have 13 tribes. Now sometimes we get 12 because we combine Ephraim and Manasseh and call it Shevet Yosef. Other times we get 12 by counting Ephraim and Manasseh as separate tribes, but we exclude Shevet Levi. The pasuk does not make it clear which way you're going, but it is mistavra, it is more logical, that Shevet Levi was not going to be counted here because they are represented by the Kohanim carrying the ark, and as a result, therefore, the 12 tribes will be minus Shevet Levi, but including Ephraim and Manasseh as 2. So we have these 12 representatives. What are they supposed to do? Vitzavu osam lemor, command them, saying, Se'u lachem mizeh mitocha yarden mimatzav roli kohanim. Carry from where the kohanim are standing. Now, obviously, it can't be mamash where the kohanim are standing, because the kohanim are still in the river channel, and that's why it's still dry. But it means adjacent to the kohanim, lift up some stones, and each tribe should lift up, or each representative of a tribe should lift up a stone. V'havartem osam imachem. Carry these stones with you. V'hinachtem osam, and you shall set them up. B'malon, in the lodging place. Asher talinu bo alayla, meaning to say, as you cross the Yarden, pick up these stones. And tonight you're going to be lodging in Eretz Yisrael, on the west bank of Eretz Yisrael, in a place that'll be called Gilgal, we will see, adjacent to Yericho. And you will set up these stones as a great monument, a monument that will endure and remind people of the miracle of the splitting of the Yarden. V'avartem osam imachem, v'inachtem osam b'malon asher talinu bo alayla. Vayikra Yehoshua el shnei masor ish, and Yehoshua called the 12 people, asher heichin b'bnei Yisrael, that he had designated, ish echad mishavet. And again, it's important that all of the tribes be here, that all of the tribes have a stone, because we have to recognize that Hashem is giving us Eretz Yisrael in the zechus, that we are a unified people. And remember that even Ruvain, Gad, and Chatzi Shevet Manasseh, who took their actual territory east of the Jordan, in the lands of Sichon and Og, they too are coming and crossing the Yarden to fight with Am Yisrael, together with Am Yisrael, just as they had promised Moshe Rabbeinu as a condition to their getting the land on the east, and just as they had told Yehoshua, and we're going to see it again. And therefore, they too, Ruvain, Gad, and Manasseh, are represented in this monument of stones. Vayomer lehem Yehoshua, and Yehoshua tells them, Ivru lifnei Aron Hashem Elokeichem, go in front of the Aron, meaning where the Aron is in the water now. El tocha Yarden, go into the Jordan. Harimu lachem ish even achas al shichmo, and take a stone. Now these are not little pebbles, these are huge stones that they would have to carry on their shoulders. Lemispar shiftei b'nei Yisrael, according to the numbers of the tribes of Israel. And why is that so? What is the purpose of these stones, and what is the purpose of this monument? Yehoshua explains, Laman tia zos os b'kir b'chem. This shall be a sign in your midst. Ki yishalun b'neichem machar lemor. When your children, your grandchildren, the future generations, will ask you in the future, Ma havanim ha'elu lachem. What is this monument of stones? V'amartem lahem, and you will tell them, Asher nichresu meimei hayarden mipnei aron baris Hashem. These stones are a reminder that the waters of the Yarden were split because of the holiness of the Ark of Hashem, Biavro Biyarden, Nichresu Mea Yarden, that the waters were split. V'hayu ha'avanim ha'ela lezikaron livnei Yisrael ad olam. And these stones will be a remembrance of this miracle forever. Now, unfortunately, obviously, we don't have these stones today, and in the course of time they were lost. And even though the pasuk says there will be a zikaron ad olam, there will be a remembrance forever, Chazal understand that that doesn't mean we will always have it. There are going to be times that we don't necessarily merit the tangible, physical symbol of this miracle, just as we don't always merit the Beis Hamikdash. But the zikaron li'olam can also exist in our hearts and in our souls and in our minds as we read the great story of how Hashem made a phenomenal miracle to give us the confidence to be able to conquer Eretz Yisrael and make it a land where we serve HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And the pasuk says, "Vayasu chen b'nei Yisrael kasher tziva Yehoshua," and b'nei Yisrael did exactly as Yehoshua commanded. Vayisu shtei esrei avanim, and they lifted up from the Jordan that was split 12 huge boulders, mitoch hayarden, kasher diber Hashem el Yehoshua lemispar shiftei b'nei Yisrael, just as Hashem had spoken to Yehoshua. V'yavirum imam el hamalon, and they transported them to their lodging, and they set it up as a monument. Vayanichum sham, and they placed them there. Now, then, interestingly enough, although these 12 people were told to remove 12 stones from the Yarden, Yehoshua then puts back into the Yarden 12 stones that presumably are going to protrude above the water level when the water comes back. And those 12 stones are a monument within the Yarden at the exact place where the Aron was and the Jewish people crossed. We have two different memorials. We have a memorial that traveled with Bnei Yisrael, and that was taken from the Yarden, and then we have a memorial that was actually put in the Yarden itself. And indeed, in the time of the Mishnah, that memorial still existed, and people would make a bracha when they passed that place. Asa lavosenu nes, that Hashem did a miracle for our forefathers, b'makom hazeh. Theoretically, if you knew the exact crossing point, you'd make that bracha even today, but today we are no longer familiar with it. So Pasuk Tes talks about the stones that Yehoshua put in the Jordan River. Ushtei mesrei avanim hekim Yehoshua b'toch Yarden, tachas matzav raglei kohanim, where the kohanim were standing. Again, it has to be next to them because they're still standing there. No say Aron abris, those who carried the ark, v'yusham. And once again it says they are there until this very day. But again, that does not mean we know where they are. We actually don't know where they are. Now, in all of this, as all of this is happening, as the 12 representatives are taking out the stones, and as Yehoshua is putting in the stones, the Kohanim are still there. Kohanim, Nosei Aron, Omdim B'toch Yarden. The Kohanim are standing in the Yarden. Tom Kol Hadavar Asher Tziva Hashem es Yehoshua Lidaber Eloham, until everything that Hashem had commanded Yehoshua was fulfilled. Kol Asher Tziva Moshe es Yehoshua. Vayimaroam, and people hurried. Vayavoru, and they crossed. Vayehi kasher tam kol ha'am lavor. When everybody had finished crossing, we don't know how long that took, but one could imagine you had a population of 600,000 men from the age of 20, and if you count the women and the children and the adolescents younger than 20, many say you had a population of 3 million. Perhaps you even had more than that because the Erev Rav, the Egyptians, there's a machlokas of the Erev Rav, died in the desert, or perhaps they entered Eretz Yisrael. But if you have the Erev Rav, you might have another few million even. So it took a long time. But now everybody crossed. Vayavor Aron Hashem b'kohanim ufnei ha'am, and the ark is going to leave after everybody crosses. But first, we are told, Vayavru b'nei Ruvain uvnei Gad v'chatzi shevet Menashe. This is a very important point. Again, as I said a few moments ago, Ruvain, Gad, and Chatzi shevet Menashe didn't want land in the west part of Eretz Yisrael, in Eretz Yisrael proper. They wanted the land that had been conquered in Moshe Rabbeinu's lifetime, from Sichon, the king of Amori, and Og Melech HaBashan, the east bank of the Jordan, Ever LeYarden, because that was fertile. It was very good for grazing. And Moshe gave them stark musar. He says, how dare you let your brethren go to war and you'll simply stay here? And they swore to Moshe that we will leave our children and our women, our wives and our flocks here, but we will cross the Yarden and fight with all of Am Yisrael. And only after all of Am Yisrael has conquered the land will we go back to our inheritance. And Moshe gave them the east bank of the Yarden on that condition. And the Navi Yehoshua wants to be very emphatic that Bnei Gad, Bnei Ruvain, and Chatzi shevet Menashe kept their promise. They were loyal. They crossed the Yarden with arms, Chamushim Lefnei Bnei Yisrael. In fact, some Mefarshim learned Lefnei Bnei Yisrael, before Bnei Yisrael, they were the first ones to cross. They didn't wait till everybody else crossed. Kasher Diber Aleim Moshe, as Moshe had told them before he died. Karboyim Elev Chalutzei Atzava Avru Lifnei Hashem LaMilchama El Arvos Yericho. From those three tribes, there were 40,000 soldiers with armaments who passed, getting ready to war, as they crossed from east to west the plains of Yericho. And the pasuk ends by Yomahu, on that very day, Gidal Hashem es Yehoshua b'einei Kol Yisrael. Yehoshua's stature was elevated in the eyes of all of Am Yisrael, because they saw that he too was so close and beloved by Hashem that he could do a miracle parallel to Kriyas Yamsuf. Vayiru oso, and they revered him. Literally, they feared him, but usually this is awe, reverence, respect. Kasher yaru es Moshe kol yemei chayav, with the same level of yira that they had for Moshe. Now, of course, Moshe Rabbeinu also had many problems and complaints, but those were aberrations. The normal attitude of towards Moshe was one of reverence and awe, and they felt that way towards Yehoshua as well. So now everybody's crossed. The 12 stones are set up in the Yarden, and the 12 stones are removed from the Yarden, and now it's time for the Kehanim carrying the Aron to leave, so the river will resume its motion. Vayomer Hashem el Yehoshua lemor, Hashem says to Yehoshua, Tzavei es HaKohanim nosei Aron ho'edus, command the Kohanim that are carrying the Ark of the Covenant, V'yalu min HaYarden, and they shall leave the Yarden river. Vayehi, and behold, Bialos HaKohanim nosei Aron bris Hashem mitoch HaYarden, as soon as they began to move, Nitku kapos ragle kehanim el Harava, their feet simply left the river channel onto the dry land. Vayashuvu mei hayarden limakomam, the waters began to resume their movement. But again, you have to understand that this was also kind of a miracle, because if the waters would have collapsed, if you have a 10-mile wall of water that collapses, you have a tsunami that could literally destroy miles and miles and miles of countryside. So the water went down gently and gradually, but it began to flow again. Vayelchu kitmol shilshom al kol gedosav, and it was flowing the way it did on its banks, the way it did yesterday and the day before. Now, Rashi does bring a very interesting chazal here. Rashi says that the way the Kohanim left the Yarden is not the same way everybody else left. Everybody else is crossing from east to west, from Shittim to Gilgal, next to Yericho, and then the water begins to move again. The Kohanim did not cross to the west. They actually went back to the very side that they came from. They stepped into the Yarden, and they didn't even go into the middle. They just stepped into the water, and when everybody crossed, they simply stepped backwards from where they came. So it actually turns out everybody's to the west. The Kohanim carrying the Aron are to the east. And then, when the water began, the Aron HaKodesh flew them across. It carried them across, lahavdil, like a magic carpet. And this is reflective of Chazal's teaching that the Aron noseyes nosav. The Aron actually carries the people who carry the Aron. So the Kohanim did not cross the Yarden. They were flown across the Yarden by the Aron HaKodesh. And the pasuk tells us, the people that crossed the Yarden, the 10th of the first month. Remember, throughout the Torah and the Tanakh, we always count the months from Nisan, which is treated as the first month. That's why Tishrei, in which there's Rosh Hashanah, in the Torah is called Chodesh Hashvi, the 7th month. So Nisan is the 10th of the first month. Vayachanu b'Gilgal, and they encamped in a place that they named Gilgal. We'll see later in the next parak why they called it Gilgal. Biktsei Mizrach Yericho, directly east of Yericho, which will be the first city they're going to conquer. V'yeshtem esrei avonim ha'ela shelokchu min hayarden, and the 12 stones, these are big boulders that had been taken from the Yarden, Hakim Yehoshua b'Gilgal, Yehoshua put up in Gilgal as a monument and a remembrance. Vayomer el b'nei Yisrael lemor, and he declared to b'nei Yisrael, as Hashem had told him, Asher yishalun b'neichem machor es avosam lemor, when your children will ask their parents, Mo avonim ha'ela, what is this big monument? V'hodatem es b'neichem, you shall tell your children, B'yabasha of our Yisrael es Yarden, that the Jewish people crossed the Yarden, B'yabasha, when it was dry, Asher Havish Hashem Elokeichem es mei Yarden mipneichem, that Hashem dried up the waters of the Yarden in front of you, ad of rechem, until you crossed it, Kasher also Hashem Elokeichem liyamsuf, again underscoring the idea that this was the miracle of the Yamsuf when you crossed Mitzrayim, and this is the miracle that you have when you enter Eretz Yisrael. Asher Havish mipaneinu ad ofreinu. Laman das kol amei haaretz, so that all of the nations of the world shall know, Yad Hashem, the hand of God. Again, Hashem doesn't have a hand, but a hand is a metaphor for power and strength. Ki chazaka. So again, this is making an interesting point, that the purpose of this monument is not only that the Jewish people should remember the chesed of Hashem, but that all of the nations, even the non-Jewish people, should see the might of Hashem, that they should fear God and revere God, and as a result will not dare to touch or harm his chosen people. So the monument is both Kalape Pnim for Am Yisrael and Kalape Chutz. So now we have finished Perek Dalet.